No, it is not.
Okay. Okay, Excellency,
Maybe
this is fine.
little better, yeah.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends who have joined us from different parts of the world. Today, we are fortunate to have, very privileged to have Brazil's ambassador to India, His Excellency Kenneth Felix the Nobrega, in our studio to discuss the G20 Summit in Rio. What can we expect from this landmark summit, uh, how it is going to play out, uh, and all that. But first, let me introduce Ambassador Nobrega. His Excellency Kenneth Nobrega is Ambassador of Brazil to India and Bhutan. Uh, Throughout his diplomatic career, Ambassador Nobrega has held several important positions at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including, among others, Secretary for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, Director of Interregional Mechanisms. He has served as BRICS and IPSA Su Serpa. I can go on and on, but just to give you an idea that he's a man very familiar and well versed with multilateral diplomacy. So he's just the right person to brief us, to update us on the evolving agenda of the Rio Summit, which is happening on November 18th and 19th. Just to give you an idea that apart from being a diplomat, from what I know, there's a very, he's a musician of sorts. He's a very mild-mannered man, extremely well-read. He's erudite, but he wears his knowledge lightly. With these words, let me invite Ambassador Nobrega to speak on the G20 Summit. Excellency, we are barely days ahead. November 18 and today is 14, so 5 days hence. And the whole world will literally descend, all the world leaders, beside the G20 leaders of G20 countries. I believe Brazil has invited 18 countries, the leaders of 18 countries, invitee countries and international organizations. So this is going to be a mega multilateral show, so to speak. And there is a lot of expectation riding on it, on the Rio Summit. 1 year passes in a wink, some would say. Delhi Summit was extremely successful, and now the summit is going to take place in Brazil. It's also a very unique moment in G20 that the succeeding presidencies are held by countries of the global south. It started with Indonesia, followed by India, now Brazil, and then the baton will pass on to South Africa. This is also the special summit in the sense that this is the first time African Union will participate as a full member after induction in the G20 family at the New Delhi Summit. So, Excellency, we would like you to focus. I would like you to dwell on, 2 or 3 questions. Number one, that in terms of major outcomes from the Rio Summit, what can we expect? What are the 2 or 3 headline outcomes which we can expect from the Rio Summit? Number 2, how is Brazil planning to advance the Global South agenda under this presidency and at the Rio Summit? And number 3, very important point about global reform of global governance institutions. I would not like to preempt you. Over to you. You have around 15 to 20 minutes to make your remarks. It will be followed by question and answer from the audience and 1 or 2 rounds from my side. Over to you, Excellency.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important discussion, and thank you for your generous introductory words about myself. I think my first point, or my first observation, is that of course the Indian presidency has achieved very significant results and has indeed set the bar very high for the succeeding presidencies. So I will touch upon the element of continuity of Brazil building on this number of achievements achieved by the Indian presidency. But let me, from at the outset, just recapitulate briefly what are the three general priorities, the main priorities for the Brazilian presidency. The first one is social inclusion and the fight against hunger and poverty. The second is energy transition and sustainable development. And the third is reform of global governance institutions. So these are the two main, the presidency is not over yet. These are our three main objectives. And now I will just give a kind of tour d'horizon regarding the efforts you have put into in order to achieve tangible results under these three priorities. And then I'm using the word tangible here because this is one of the ways Brazil wanted to administer its presidency, in the sense of focusing on tangible results. And this, so in a nutshell, and then I will go into more detail, I think we have already achieved three very important results under these three priorities, respectively. One is the launching of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. This Global Alliance was approved late in July. Then, in October, we approved a global mobilization against climate change, and thirdly, in August, we approved a call to action on global governance. Not we approved, of course. The group approved under the Brazilian presidency, approved a call to action on global governance reform. Before I enter into these details, let me relate to one point you raised during your introduction regarding the Indian presidency, and then followed by the presidency of another emerging country, a developing country like Brazil, which will be, of course, in due course, followed by the South African presidency. So I think that the Brazilian presidency, to a reasonable extent or considerable extent, is a continuity of the Indian presidency in terms of trying to boost, as India has, the legitimacy of the group. Second, ensuring that the priorities of the South global countries remain on the agenda of the group. And thirdly, trying to boost or to promote or to make progress in terms of reform of the global governance institutions. So when I talk about legitimacy, I'm referring, of course, to the accession of the African group to the G20, which was an exceptional move, exceptional result, because then we have added 55, I think, countries to the G20, around the table of the G20, represented by the African Union. So Brazil, in terms of building on this effort to boost the legitimacy of the G20, has organized the first ever G20 meeting inside the UN, open for the first time to all members of the organization. I'm referring to the second foreign ministers meeting of the G20, which took place late in September in New York. It was a meeting open inside the headquarters of the UN and open to all membership. So this, I think, it was a first ever, and building on this idea of boosting the legitimacy of the G20. Another aspect of also working on boosting the legitimacy of the G20 was the creation of the G20 Social, which is another engagement group which is aimed at broadening the participation of civil society organizations and social movements by seeking to integrate their contributions into the Rio de Janeiro Leaders Declaration, which is, as we speak, is being negotiated by the Sherpas. And also another dimension of legitimacy also is added when we have launched successfully launched these two alliances, one against hunger and poverty, and another the global task force or mobilization against climate change, because these are two task forces or alliances which are aimed at delivering tangible results to the world citizenry, to the people on the ground. So to boost the perception, the international global perception of the citizenry of the whole world, that the G20 is seeking to find solutions to their problems, so to put it plainly. So these are I think, achievements of the Brazilian presidency in terms of boosting the legitimacy of the G20. I think another point which I made, it was we also built on the Indian presidency effort to make sure that the priorities of the global South remain on the agenda of the G20, of course, alongside the priorities of the developed world. The idea is to connect the two agendas, to achieve consensus when it comes to hammering out, defining priorities for the group, which is a unique group because it brings together, as we recall, countries from the developed and the developing world. So, under this effort of boosting the priorities of the developing countries, of course, the two global alliances against hunger and poverty, and the other against climate change. Because in a nutshell, the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty is an initiative which brings together the two tracks. I will make more specific comments on that later, on the tracks, the financial tracks and the Sherpa tracks. But just mentioning here, for the sake of describing the Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, the task force brings together the two tracks in terms of, on the one hand, providing a pillar of national experiences when it comes to fighting hunger and poverty. Only when it comes to bring to the table, to contribute to well-tested and successful programs of fighting poverty throughout the developing world, including, of course, India and Brazil and South Africa and all other developing countries who have been making consistent efforts throughout the years to reduce hunger and poverty in their respective countries. So the alliance is a platform which brings the contribution of developing countries with well-tested programs. Then you have another pillar, which is the pillar of cooperation, in the sense that, of course, the successful experiences are there, but then you have to relate there, to adapt them to the realities, concrete realities of other developing countries. So there is this cooperation pillar, which enhances the dialogue between the receiving country, so to speak, and the providing country. And then you have a financial pillar, in the sense that, which is, by the way, the task force is open to all membership, to all countries willing to contribute financially to developing countries which are willing to use the platform and willing to use the platform to implement in their own countries these successful programs, which I have mentioned. So the idea is that it's a platform that a three-pillar platform that brings together developing countries and developed countries here acting as donors in order to boost the efforts of the developing countries to reach their goals in terms of SDGs mainly. This is one aspect of our efforts to put firmly on the agenda the developing countries' priorities. The other is climate change. Here you are talking about not only catering for the interests of the developing world, but also the developed world, because the idea here is there is some
Yeah, yeah,
noise
yeah.
going on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just wait 1 minute. Just sorting it out.
yeah. So,
Just hang on.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's okay.
yeah.
Let's
I think there is some computer glitch here.
okay.
You can continue. I mean, we can hear you.
Yes, I think now we can hear. Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
as I was mentioning, the task force for global mobilization against climate change is a platform, is also a platform
Uh-huh.
which is aimed to strengthen the not the response of the developing world or the developed world, is to strengthen the global response to climate change in all its aspects through basically the mobilization of financial flows for climate action. And then, of
Right.
course, we have uh, we have here a platform of course, which we call action reset, a platform of two pillars, better spoken: resetting action and resetting finance. Resetting actions is basically a locus in this platform, on this platform, where you can develop, help countries develop their broad ecological transition plans, national ecological transition plans, as Brazil has developed one, India has developed. It's a place where you find the best knowledge, the best specialists when it comes to helping countries articulate a national ecological plan with long-term and medium-term and long-term objectives, not just short-term emergency actions. Of course, they are also important, but the idea is to set a plan. And of course, the other pillar of the platform is called resetting finance. And then here it's about mobilizing financial resources, public, national public resources, multilateral banks, institutional resources, and private resources in order to combat climate change in developing countries. On the understanding that the lack of financial flows for mitigation and adaptation efforts is the main threat to the whole global effort to reduce global warming and its consequences. So here we are working. I think the G20 has worked, and then this is also largely building on the Indian presidency. The idea of working to develop short, medium term, and long term actions, and request public and private financial agents to develop new financial models or instruments in order to viabilize the channeling of more resources to developing countries for mitigations and adaptation purposes. So, and it's not just to talk about financial resources. It's about also talking about what kind of good policies and regulations and incentives could be adopted to induce the mobilization of capitals towards developing countries. For example, including green bond schemes, transition plans for financial institutions, and so on and so forth. So these are the three. I just mentioned the aspect of boosting legitimacy, and now which is built on Indian presidency achievements. I have spoken about the concrete efforts to ensure that priorities of developing countries remain on the agenda and are subject to implementation, not only of discussion. Beyond discussion, we need implementation. And the third point now that I'm going to touch upon is the reform of global governance. Of course, as my starting point is recalling that India has achieved this significant result in finding and in viabilizing the issuing of a summit declaration in last year. As you recall, this was not possible in 2022, as you recall, during the preceding presidency, and of course the big challenge was where the paragraphs, speaking more concretely here when it comes to a summit statement, where the paragraphs which focused on geopolitical issues, the burning geopolitical issues of the day, so to speak. So this I think paved the way for Brazil to negotiate a call for action on global governance reform. And then this call for action, which I have already mentioned, from the point of view of boosting the G20 legitimacy, as I mentioned, because now I'm just going to focus on the merits of the call for action itself, because it builds on the idea that the countries which are member countries of G20, from the developed and from the developing world countries that are really now I have seen their relations with other countries deteriorating in the last years. They were able to sit around the table and agree that there is a need for the reform of global governance institutions, political institutions, or meaning General Assembly, Security Council, so that they reflect the geopolitical realities of our day, of our times, and also a reform or reinforcing multilateral institutions, financial multilateral institutions, and trade multilateral institution, meaning, of course, the WTO. So I think that this was a very interesting result, because giving against this geopolitical backdrop of our days, I think that was a very interesting achievement, important achievement. I think that I'm already used 16 minutes, so just let me, in closing, saying that apart from these big results, which were really the focus of have been the focus of our presidency, I'm just mentioning that the Brazilian presidency has managed to issue 12 ministerial declarations, which is important to mention, given the geopolitical times we are going through. We also have, also in this case, also building on the Indian G20 presidency, we have inaugurated the Women's Empowerment Working Group within the G20 to combat misogyny and promote gender equality in the workplace. There was also, among others, I'm just picking some other important results, in the health field, creation of the Coalition for Local Production of Vaccines and Medicines. This is another important. The first time that, not the first time, but the consolidation of a platform of discussion of artificial intelligence in the UN, of course, in the G20, aiming at consolidating also this discussion within the UN. So these are, for example, three other important achievements of our presidency. Of course, as we speak, as I told at the outset, we are the negotiation of the joint statement by the leaders is in course. So we are confident that this also will this negotiation will deliver a good summit statement. So I stop here. Of course, there are many more details I could go through, but let's stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, for that big picture view. You have laid out the canvas, and even as we speak, the Rio Declaration is being negotiated by Sherpas and sous Sherpas. And I have no doubt it will be a transformational declaration in many ways. And one of the important things you have brought out throughout your address is boosting the legitimacy of G20 and also multilateralism, which some say is needs fixing. The Rio Summit is also would serve as a vivid demonstration of how we can rejuvenate the spirit of multilateralism, and restore global trust in multilateral institutions. But okay, let me ask you a question, which is your last point about reform of global governance, which is an issue of pressing interest for both India and Brazil and other emerging economies. As you know, this whole business of reform of global governance institutions, including Security Council, has become more like a kind of a rhetoric which is repeated and spouted at every multilateral forum. We just had the BRICS summit in Kazan. I was there myself. And we saw that, again, the emphasis on reform and expansion of the Security Council. My question to you is, given that the G20 also includes some coffee club members who are not quite enthusiastic about Security Council reforms, do you think there is a G20 consensus we will see on this issue? How would it propel the process? And also, this issue has an added importance because next year Brazil will be holding the presidency, the chairship of BRICS. Over to you. Yeah.
Well, just as a starting point, this call for action. The call for action included, of course, as I mentioned, the reform of financial governance, a multilateral trade system, but also, of course, and most importantly, the reform of the UN. Well, we are relying on, I'm afraid of misquoting important people, misquoting anybody, but especially important people. I recall that I think in an interview, the Secretary General of the UN, Guterres, has said that, has expressed the view that there is now a sense that the reform of the UN must be carried out. He didn't really mention the steps and how this could be achieved, but this sense, that general sense that there must be a reform. And I think this, I venture to say that this is a general feeling among G20 members, in the sense that it's now so obvious. Has been obvious for some time, but now it's even more obvious that we really need a reform of the global governance institutions. If they are to play, we expect them to play some role on promoting a more inclusive global governance, and so I think there is I think we are at I would say perhaps in a better situation than perhaps 2 years ago regarding this point. But I don't want here to sell illusions and making projections, optimist projections regarding the scenario of the reform of the global governance institutions. But I think that there is a sense more mature, that has matured in the sense, in the idea that maturing the idea that we need that reform. So this is, I think, it's a kind of cautious answer to your question, but I think that we should exercise caution in order not to get carried away, to embark on projections which perhaps will distance us from the reality.
Thank you, Excellency. At this point, I'd like to introduce Sanusha Naidu, who joins us from Cape Town. She is an eminent political analyst and researcher. She's worked a lot on Africa and Global South. Sanusha, you may like to speak, or if you have some question for the ambassador, on the importance of the Rio Summit from the point of view of Africa. This is the first time the African Union is participating as a full member. And essentially, people are still trying to figure out what is the inclusion of African Union in G20? What does it mean in reality? And how do you see the Rio agenda? Over to you.
Good day, Manish. Good day, Ambassador. It's always a pleasure to be on the platform with you, Manish, and good day to everyone that's on the platform. And thank you for the invitation. I think it's a very interesting time for South Africa, particularly having hosted the BRICS Summit in 2023, which was quite pivotal in the sense of the expansion of the BRICS and the inclusion of 4 members. And then, of course, taking on the G20 as the incoming chair or presidency of the G20 in December of this year, and then going forward until next year. Particularly, I think, as the ambassador was speaking, one of the key points that really struck for me, or was very pivotal for me, was the issue of legitimacy. And the point that the ambassador made about how the tangible outcomes or outputs of this Rio Summit is about legitimacy. And you picked it up very nicely, Manesh, because you spoke about the coffee club kind of scenario of members in the G20 that are not as enthusiastic about reform. And I think before the summit, in the intervening period, even in terms of where the positioning of Africa on the UN security reform and the global legitimacy architecture and the governance institutions was really around what would be the kind of criteria going forward. And I think for South Africa's presidency of the G20, it's an interspersing of the continuity, both with Indonesia, India, Brazil, but coming to that kind of a quad that's coming to an end of that rotating presidency of the G20, but also bringing into stark focus the questions of what are the socio-economic challenges, what are the development issues that plague Africa. And if you're looking at South Africa's theme for the incoming presidency of the G20, it's around that level of solidarity, equality, and development and sustainable development. And of course, the fact that our new Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Minister Lamola, was at that meeting in September, which I think, again, gave us an idea that the key issues that are coming out are going to be central to the African Union agenda, but more importantly, I think, to Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. And within that space, we're still waiting for the actual formalization and the priority areas that the South African government will focus on. But we are getting a key understanding of that. And one of the key understandings around that is with regard to debt and development, because I think it's key to understand that this G20 is not only about what the financial architecture is in terms of the economic governance reform of the IFIs, of the special drawing rights, and the question about, there's a very critical dilemma that currently faces all countries of the world, whether you're in the developed world or in the developing world, whether you're in the global south or the global north, whether you are in Africa, Latin America, Asia, whatever. And that's the debt dilemma. That we have a silent dilemma on debt, where countries in the global south are essentially recasting or reconfiguring their budgets towards debt servicing. And one of the first countries that defaulted on their loan during the COVID, towards the end of the COVID and after the COVID period, was Zambia. And this was a big issue in terms of how do you deal with this. And so if you look at the UNCTAD discussions, and if you're looking at the question of the IFIs, we spoke about the reform of the UN Security Council and the governance architecture. But there are other bigger questions and existential crises that are currently afflicting the global governance institutions and architecture in the financial realm as well. One of them is around what do you do with this spiraling debt crisis, and how does the DSSI in the G20 talk about this? And South Africa is still a member of the developing working group in the G20, which is critical as well, because if we in Africa, in Latin America, and even in the developed economies, as much as these economies may be seen to be more insulated, but they're also more fragile. And so the debt servicing dilemma is we're moving money away from what is key issues around social development, which the ambassador raised very well in terms of the social 20, in terms of the G20. But more importantly, I think for Africa, it is about the intersection between the resources, the critical minerals, climate change, which is a very real problem for us. I just came back from an oceans governance workshop, and one of the key things they were talking about was climate refugees in Africa, talking about the fact that you're going to end up with stateless citizens. Where do you go? What are the protocols in terms of are countries willing to take on the next kind of social dilemma around climate change? And that is real for us in terms of the extractives and so forth. But the last point I want to make is really this issue of South Africa finding that hook and that pivot. Because it's not just about South Africa, it's the fact that South Africa's Africa agenda also intersects with the African Union and Agenda 2063. And so I think it's going to be critical around the IFIs, it's going to be around the cross-cutting themes of food security, food insecurity questions. It's going to be about social development, but it's about the WTO as well and the trade and development issues, because these are key dynamics around an economic global architecture that is becoming increasingly difficult to provide the kind of development for all.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Anusha, for your intervention. Ambassador, would you like to respond to it? And, essentially the point is that Brazil has, a fairly sizable population of African origin, and for Brazil also has a very robust relations with Africa. How do you see, in terms of the African agenda, how will the Rio Summit advance Africa's interest and aspiration? Very briefly.
Okay. Okay, this was a very ample, very rich comment. So I'm trying to address some of these points. So starting from your last observation, yes, Brazil, more than 60% of the Brazilian population has African roots, and this is why at some point in time when Brazil became a democracy in the late 80s, came back, not became a democracy because we were a democracy before, then we went through 20 years of dictatorship. The pressure of civil society exerted pressure on government and foreign relations to prioritize Africa in our foreign policy. We put high on the agenda our agenda with Africa, our foreign relations. So this is an important point. It stems from the fact that Brazilian is a democracy and with a vibrant civil society, which wants to make foreign policy reflect the realities of our country, the social realities of our country. It's just one point to comment on your last observation. And another point is that apart from the African group, we have invited Angola, Egypt, and Nigeria as 3 African countries to the summit. Just to recall that. And now turning to some points, how to address the idea of importance of addressing African interests and needs within G20. And so this is having this in mind. We Brazil are introducing something innovative, which is to bring together the financial and the political tracks, the Sherpa track that is spoken, and the financial track of the G20. In a simple words, if you have good political decisions and consensus, now let's translate this political and decisions, these consensuses, into concrete action. Meaning, how we are going to get the resources to implement the good decisions made at the political level. So the idea of bringing together under some under the two of the three main priorities of our presidency, the two tracks together. So this is why I mentioned the two task forces, which one focusing on fighting hunger and poverty, and the other on climate change. The idea is that we can really translate this discussion into something useful in the I mentioned at the outset, tangible, for civil society across the world, and particularly for Africa, by bringing together these two pillars of the G20. So that, as you have mentioned, Ms. Naidu, it's not going to be only about discussing in isolation financial issues and political issues. So this is one point. Of course, we can develop this discussion. This is open this box, and then you can go on. I'm just touching upon this. And the other, you have mentioned the WTO trade. Yes, this has been always a platform of Brazil. You can country can develop and grow and have the financial, the income resources, the public income resources, or budgetary resources, to implement social policies if they grow, and in order to spur the growth, the idea of connecting developing countries to the more dynamic economies of the world through trade, it's essential. It's essential, and this is even when we see the Marrakesh Treaty, which is of course the founding treaty of WTO. You have in the preamble, if I'm not mistaken, to promote development through trade and so on and so on. So of course WTO has to be re-energized, and in order to make this possible. It's not just about channeling financial resources, which is very important. But I'm not saying that, but you have also to give the means for these countries to grow, to make progress. So I will stop here because, of course, you can talk about.
Okay, Excellency, thanks for your response. Now I invite Elena, the Russian journalist. Elena, introduce yourself and you can ask your question.
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. Manish, thank you so much for giving me the word. And good afternoon, His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, and other colleagues. Yes, it was very, very interesting to listen to your speech on G20 Summit on Brazil presidency. And what I wanted to elaborate on is that recently, as we remember, my country, Russia, hosted BRICS summit, and you also, Ambassador, today mentioned BRICS in your speech, and now we have G20 summit in Rio, right? And what I want to ask you, if there is some experience which you can take from my country as the presidency country in BRICS now in organizing, in preparation of this G20 summit. Then it is one point which I want to ask you about. Secondly is these are two big forums. What really BRICS, Brazil is also the prominent member country of BRICS, and as well as G20, and Russia also, and India also. What can be done by these forums, by these summits, big event, most important international event? What can these forums really do for the development of the world, or for the resolving of the problems of developing countries, of for the diminishing the poverty in the world. And another question I have on declaration. Maybe I will ask it after you answer these questions.
On the declaration, I cannot speak because it's being negotiated as we speak.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. So, is the text of the declaration already negotiated? Is it ready, the text? And what are the questions which are most complicated and which of them were most difficult to reach the consensus? It is as for the declaration.
Okay.
Excellency, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, of course. Starting from the BRICS, your successful Russian BRICS presidency, I think that you have, I think the contribution, among other contributions of your presidency to the G20 Summit, is now within a larger group discussing this reform of multilateral institutions. Multilateral governance, which has been the among other one of the bread and butters, so to speak, of the BRICS. I have myself worked as a Brazilian Sherpa for BRICS for some years. So I think that Russia continues promoted the development of this discussion based on the solid already BRICS tradition of discussing the reform of multilateral institutions. Now with the challenge of bringing together more countries, because we have 5 countries now. We have more countries. So I think this is the idea of building blocks. I'm mentioning that when you discuss in BRICS and you make progress within BRICS on such an important discussion as the reform of the multilateral institutions, you are building a block towards consensus, because, as you mentioned, many of the countries which are now member of BRICS are also members of G20. So this leads to it contributes to increase the maturity, to boost to the maturity of the discussion, because when you have one meeting of important forum after the other, the importance of a country like Brazil, that in this case belongs to both groups, is to pull the thread of main discussions throughout these groups. As I haven't mentioned the outset, we are building on the G20 Indian presidency. Now we want also to build on the discussions held within BRICS under the Russian presidency, pulling the thread of main discussions, reform of the multilateral institutions, also the challenge of developing new financial mechanisms to address climate change and to address hunger and poverty. As we know, after the pandemic, we have lost some of the progress we had made before the pandemic towards achieving the sustainable development goals. So the SDGs. So this is important. I think this successive fora or summits are important for a country like Brazil. In terms of pulling the thread of important discussions. So we are going to be the president of BRICS next year, right? So the idea is to pull this thread further, and this is the idea, I would say.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Ambassador. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
And what about the declaration? What about the declaration? Anyway, it's still negotiated. The text is not ready for now.
No, it's normal. We are today is Thursday. It's
okay.
Of course it's under negotiation.
5 days.
Yes, this is normal. This is normal.
When the document is ready just before the summit starts.
No, it never. It's never. No document is ready before the start of the summit. I've never seen something like that. Perhaps it happened
Especially the
a long
G20
time
summit.
ago. I remember, for example, as Sous-Sherpa, BRICS Sous-Sherpa in 2018, under the South African presidency, that we negotiated long hours. Not until the eve of the summit, no, because we reached consensus a little earlier. But I would say that it takes time, because even if you had 5 countries largely coalition around some important, the main points, but of course then you want to have more of your language, of your priorities in a paragraph, so you feel, as a diplomat, you feel obliged to fight until the last minute for your word, for your expression, for your comma, additional.
And Excellency,
comma.
if you recall last year,
It's like that.
at the Delhi summit, Alina, the declaration was finally done just on the very day the summit is well begun, and the last paras on Ukraine were sorted out only at the 11th hour after burning midnight oil, and that's in the afternoon PM announced the inclusion of the African Union as a member after the Ukraine deal was done. So these things go down the wire. Now I invite Arvind. I just got to know him. He's been in Brazil for many years, and he has something alarming that he has been living in Brazil for many years, and he tells me that there was a bomb blast or something. Is it? What is it, Arvind, that you want to ask?
Yes, Excellency. My name is Arvind. I've been one of the first students to go to Brazil to do studies back in the 2008, 2007, the glorious days of much more glorious days of BRICS, the initial glorious days. The G20 and B20 and other related events have been very well organized in Brazil. Excellent. Congratulations on that. But in the recent couple of few days, there has been some security incidents, especially some shootings in the airport, international airport, and a bomb blast yesterday in front of the president's house. Just curious, and I wanted to understand what kind of a guarantee or security, in addition to GLO, to the Brazilian government give to the visiting head of states and authorities. Thank you.
I think first, we should not bundle together the 2 events you have just mentioned, because starting by the second, this blast, it was a very unfortunate event where one individual, one Brazilian citizen, decided to make a solitary individual protest against what he sees as not fair decisions of the Supreme Court or of the Brazilian Congress or the executive. As you know, it's we have in Brasilia, Brazil, the 3 power square, where the 3 main buildings of the Brazil, which represent the Brazilian democracy, democratic institutions, face each other, right? Is the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. So it was he made this protest in a very symbolic place in Brasilia, but it was a kind of lonely protest. There was nobody there, and it was very unfortunate because it ended with his death. It's not clear if it was self-inflicted death or it was an accident. But these blasts were the police was there, the security force was there. So it was a very an isolated incident. So let's not bundle together to the other, which is related to crime. To crime, and this has, of course, raised. Of course, sometimes these criminal organizations, they choose some right moment on the eve of this big event to try to damage credibility, image of the country. So they chose an emblematic place, which is the airport, of course, the largest airport of Brazil, and of course security now has been really boosted and by this event you mentioned. But I would not bundle together, because these are very different events, with different underlying motivations, I would say.
Thank you, Excellency.
Yes.
Thank you, Arvind, for that question.
Mhm.
We now move on. Excellency, we have been at it for some time, this discussion. And I want to ask you something which is more looking ahead to the future. And at this point, I wanted to showcase this book, which you've done and you're all too familiar with, uh,
Yes.
which is the book we have done and to which you yourself has contributed. This is India's G20 Legacy, Shaping a New World Order, edited by me and with a lot of eminent contributors. Uh, Now, my question to you is this. Uh, that when we are talking about, I mean, from what you have told, and you've got to explore the linkages in many ways. The Rio Summit and Brazil G20 presidency builds on some of the achievements
Yes. Oh, certainly.
of a India G20 presidency. There is a continuity, there's amplification, and all that. And so, looking ahead, when we are talking about Brazil's G20 legacy, what would that be? I mean, how would Brazil like the Rio summit to be remembered? I mean, we in Delhi this time, we got this headline outcome about the African Union getting in as 21st member. And there are quite a few things which Brazil has lined up. And of course, one of the headline outcomes is the Global Alliance of Poverty against Poverty and Hunger. So, I mean, what do you think, in your assessment, would be the enduring legacy of Brazil G20 presidency?
Well, the summit is not over, so let's be cautious here. And of course, it will not fall to me to define and to articulate in political discourse what is going to will be our legacy. But as ambassador, and now as somebody which is not the guy in charge in Brasilia. So that's just my opinion here. I think the legacy will be a legacy of uh, reaching out to global citizenry with more inclusiveness and trying to show that a group that now I think represents, if I'm not mistaken, 85% of the global GDP, 75% of trade, two-thirds of the world population, is capable to deliver, to reach out to a larger number of citizens throughout the world and deliver. The question is delivery, because we can make all these important political decisions, but if there is no delivery and there is no signaling that delivery is on the way, credibility will deteriorate. So this idea of these task forces bringing together the two tracks, it's about this. So I think it's a legacy of reaching out, of delivering. But let's leave to my political masters the decision, the focus of the Brazilian legacy they want to imprint. Okay.
Right. Sanusha, you have a question for the ambassador?
Thank you very much, Manish, and thank you, Ambassador. I think you've really given us a very bird's eye view of the behind the scenes, the technical issues, the policy dynamics, and of course what the issue is. I want to pick up on Manish's point about legacy and continuity. Brazil takes over the presidency of the BRICS next year, and it's quite an important dynamic in how do you find the synergy between just coming out of the G20 presidency, and of course let's not preempt what the declaration will come forward with, but how do you take that momentum from the G20 into the BRICS, and also within the fact that you're going to be hosting the Conference of the Parties. And one of your big things in this legacy outcome, or the tangible outcome, is your global the task team on the global multilateralism organization on climate change, and that's going to be key in terms of finding that the synergies between all of this, if it's about reaching out to people and reaching out to delivery, that's the big framing of the question. But then linked to all of this is also dealing with a world system that's in a state of inflection, that's basically at a tipping point. It's no longer a predictable world order, it's an unpredictable world order. We're in a multipolar world, but with multipolarity that comes with a lot of in different types of conflicts and instabilities. And just looking at the fact that you had a very critical set of elections that is not just the US, but you're having elections that are changing the dynamic of democracy globally. So how would Brazil keep that fire alive as an Olympic flame that it takes to every kind of platform?
Yes. I think the image of Olympic flame is very good, because since we will, by the end of next year, we will have had 3 presidencies, right? G20, BRICS, and COP30. So and then this is a very good image. First point. The second is the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, the idea of Brazil is pulling some threads of negotiations across these 3 presidencies, and I think 2 of them being one of them being, of course, reform of multilateral institutions, and the other connecting the reform of multilateral institutions to the need to reach out to the world citizenry, and then it has to do basically with the mobilizing financing, and also discussing the reform of the multilateral trading system. So I think we have to. I think the idea is to pull threads of negotiation, because if you pull these threads, this will contribute to maturing these discussions. And I think the COP30 will be a good culmination, because if there is one area where multilateralism is the only way out, is climate change, because then we are really in the same boat. And then the whole humanity is in the same boat. You have seen this extreme global weather events in horrible global weather events in Brazil, the drought in the northern part of the country, and the rains in the extreme south of Brazil, which basically led to the shrinkage of the GDP of our southernmost state, which is really serious. So, but it has also affected California, Spain, and so on and so forth. So I think that the point of making of reform of global governance is the best place is the climate forum. And so I see this as a culmination of 3 presidencies. If you take into account this basic overarching challenges we have. So this is the way I see these presidencies.
Excellency, I have a question from Ananya Singh. She works with our think tank, Center for Global India Insights. Building upon the G20 Summit, how do you see Brazil's relations or Latin America's relations, South Asia and India developing? Is South Asia a priority for Latin America? Is India becoming a more important country for Latin America?
And well, Brazil, I can speak basically for Brazil. Of course.
Yes, that's right.
For Brazil, definitely, India has been already has been for many years a key partner in multilateral fora, as we know, since 1947, for that matter. What we have seen in the last years is that the bilateral dimension of our relations is gaining more content. So this strategic partnership, basically anchored in the tradition of multilateral cooperation, has now has been acquiring more content, economic content and technological content. I think just one figure which I think illustrates that in the last 15 months we had 46 missions from Brazil here. which are business missions, science and technology missions, most of them led by government, middle to high level government officials, but the sheer number. And then you have also numerous missions from India to Brazil. So the interest of our citizens, of our business sectors, science and technology institution is there. So I think it speaks loudly than sometimes our political declarations. I mean, these are the facts. Regarding expanding to Latin America, I'm not so knowledgeable about that. What I can just also exemplify is that in this year of 2024, we had a record number of high-level visits from Latin America to India. I can recall here, I'm not going to be exhaustive.
Yes, that's right. You're right. Yeah.
Minister for Jamaica, Foreign Minister of Brazil, Foreign Minister of Argentina, Foreign Minister of Chile, a Vice Minister from Colombia. I think India opened 2 embassies in South America, one in Bolivia and the other one in Paraguay. There have been also missions. Then I don't have detailed information missions to the Caribbean region. So we are seeing a boost of high-level meetings. And of course, together with these high-level delegations, we have businessmen going, accompanying these delegations. And I think Latin America is a source for the world, for that matter, for food security, of minerals, critical minerals, also energy. In case of Brazil, and I'm now speaking for Brazil, biofuels. Of course, we are one of the leaders in biofuels in the world. So I think we are already seeing this, but I don't have really the Latin American wide details.
That is a separate discussion. In fact, we'll do it at some point. So thank you so much. I think we are coming toward the end of our discussion today. Just one last question I wanted to ask you, which is on the Ukraine issue. Last year, as you remember, in the India's presidency, Sherpas had to burn literally midnight oil, and till the last minute there was no consensus. What about what has been Brazil's experience? Are those paras in place for the declaration?
Actually, I cannot tell you the details because having been a negotiator, I perfectly know that behind closed doors, people discuss differently and manage to hammer out solutions. So I will not be in. I think there would be a lack of prudence from my part if I would be guessing what is going on there. But I think that Brazil has been a country that is capable, has shown capacity to talk to the Russians, to the Ukrainians. I think that we have a basis to conduct and to build this.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I'm going to end with a bit of self-advertisement. All those who are interested in G20 go to read this book. It's available on Amazon and everywhere else. And among others, Brazil's ambassador himself has contributed a chapter to the book. And just about who is who of India's diplomatic and strategic community. And of course, we will have another book very soon on Brazil G20 presidency of Sanusha, South Africa. So this continuum of global South, I think this is a transformation moment in international relations. And in concluding, one of the thoughts that comes to my mind is that after South Africa, a new cycle begins with the United States, the developed country, the world's most powerful country. For all the focus on the South for the past 4 years, is there a guarantee that the South concerns and interests of the South will continue to dominate the G20 agenda? That remains, that will be a subject for future discussion, and we will see as we go along. Thank you so much, Excellency, for your time, for your insights, for your very timely and finding time 3-4 days. I was not sure whether you will find time to do this. but very illuminating for me personally and for our audience. Thank you, Sanusha, for joining from Cape Town. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, all of you who have found time to join and who are watching from different geographies and have been a part of this conversation. We will be editing the video a bit and circulate it. And also, our people are going to be putting together a report, which we'll put on our website and share with you. Thank you so much. Till we meet again. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellency, was it okay?